There was no meeting. Nobody stood up and announced it. There was no vote and no decision and no declaration of any kind. My people simply, quietly, over a couple of generations, stopped trusting the food that the modern world was offering them. They watched it arrive, and they looked at it, and they turned back to their own gardens and their own hogs and their own hens, and they never really came back. And today I'm going to tell you why, and I'll be honest with you the whole way through, because this is a subject where it's terribly easy to be dramatic and dishonest, and the true version is more useful than the frightening one. So let me get right into it. Now let me tell you straight away what this is not, because I'll not have you misled. This is not me telling you that modern food is poison. It isn't. This is not me telling you that everything in a package will hurt you, or that there's a conspiracy in a boardroom somewhere to make your family ill. There isn't. And this is not me telling you that the old days were some paradise of perfect eating, because they weren't, and folks went hungry in ways that would frighten you. What actually happened is quieter than any of that, and far more interesting, and once you see it, you'll see it everywhere for the rest of your life. Here's the heart of it, and I'll say it as plainly as I can. My people didn't stop trusting modern food because they thought it was poison. They stopped trusting it because they couldn't see it being made. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else follows from that one sentence. Let me explain what I mean. For all of history, until very recently, everybody knew where their food came from. Completely. You knew the cow. You'd fed her. You knew the ground the potatoes came out of because you'd dug it. You knew the hog by sight, and you'd raised him from a piglet, and you knew exactly what he'd eaten his whole life. You knew the hens. You'd ground the flour, or you knew the man who did. There was no gap at all between you and your food. Not a single link in the chain was hidden from you, because there was hardly a chain at all. And then, within about 2 generations, that changed entirely. Food began arriving from somewhere, from a factory you'd never see, made by people you'd never meet, from ingredients grown who knows where, by who knows whom, processed in ways nobody could explain to you, containing things with names nobody could pronounce, and shipped across a continent to a shelf. And you were simply expected to trust all of it, completely, every day, for the rest of your life, with the health of your children, on nothing but the word of a stranger and a picture on the box. And my people looked at that and thought, quite reasonably, no. Not because they knew something was wrong with it, because they couldn't know anything at all about it. And that's a different thing entirely. And it's the honest thing. That's the whole shift. Food went from something you knew to something you trusted, and my people were never willing to make that trade, because they'd been raised to believe that trust ought to be earned by people you can actually see, and a box can't earn anything. Now let me give you the 4 things they actually noticed, because it wasn't only philosophy, they had eyes. The first is that they noticed the list. When food started coming with a list of ingredients on the side, and that list had 30 things on it, and 25 of them were words that no one had ever heard spoken aloud, that was strange, because their food had no list. Bread was flour, water, salt, yeast. Butter was cream. Sauerkraut was cabbage and salt. A ham was a ham, and salt, and smoke, and thyme. Nothing in their kitchen needed a list, because everything in it was an ingredient. And when a loaf of bread arrives with 30 ingredients in it, a reasonable person is entitled to ask what the other 26 are for. And the honest answer, most of the time, is that they're there to make it cheaper to make, or to make it last longer on a shelf, or to make it taste better than a cheap thing has any right to taste. Which are all fine business reasons, but not one of them is a reason that has anything to do with you. The second thing they noticed was the shelf life. Real food goes bad. That's not a defect. That's the nature of food, and it's how you know it's food. Milk sours. Bread molds in days. Meat spoils. Fruit rots. Everything real is on its way back to the earth from the moment it's made. So when something sits on a shelf for a year or 2 and nothing whatsoever happens to it, not a mold, not a smell, no change at all, that's genuinely worth noticing. Because if the bacteria and the molds, which have been eating food for as long as there's been food, won't touch a thing, a person's entitled to wonder about it. Now, I'll be honest, there are perfectly sound and old reasons a food keeps. Drying keeps food. Salt keeps food. Sugar keeps food. Canning keeps food. My own cellar is full of food that keeps for a year, and there's nothing sinister in it at all. So this isn't a rule, it's a question. But it's a fair question, and nobody asks it. The third thing they noticed is that the food was engineered to be irresistible. And this one is real, and it's genuinely worth understanding because it explains a great deal about modern eating. A great deal of modern food is very carefully designed by clever, well-paid people to hit precisely the right combination of sweet and salt and fat and crunch that makes a human being unable to stop eating it. That's not an accident, and it's not a conspiracy either. It's just product development, and it's done openly, and it's extremely good. But think about what it means. You are eating something designed by experts to defeat your own sense of having had enough. Your great-grandmother's cooking was not designed to defeat anything. It was designed to feed her family and then let them get on with the day. And a person who eats food that's trying to overcome them 3 times a day for a lifetime is in a fight they were never told they'd entered. And the fourth thing they noticed was the simplest and the most damning. They noticed the people. And this is the one that folks find hardest. So let me be careful and honest with it. My people looked around at the world that was eating the new food, and over the decades they saw more and more sickness of certain kinds. And they looked at their own community, eating their own food, working their own land, and they didn't see nearly so much of it. Now, here I must be honest with you, and I want you to hear this properly. That is not proof of anything. My people also work physically all day, and sleep properly, and live in tight communities, and don't smoke, and have far less stress, and every one of those things matters enormously to health, and honest researchers who've studied it will tell you the same. So I cannot tell you it was the food. Nobody can. What I can tell you is that a whole community watched the world change its food and change its health at the same time, and drew its own conclusion, and was never persuaded to change its mind. That's not science, but it's not nothing either. Let me tell you how the change actually arrived, because it's worth picturing, and it wasn't dramatic at all. It came slowly, and it came helpfully, and every single step of it looked like a kindness. First, the store had a few things in tins that were hard to get otherwise, and that was genuinely useful. Then it had bread you didn't have to bake, and for a woman who'd been up since 4, that was a mercy, honestly. Then it had a soup in a can, and a cake from a box, and a supper in a tray, each one saving an hour of hard work, each one arriving with a smiling picture and a promise of a modern, easier life. And nobody was lying to anybody. It was easier. It genuinely was. And that's how it happened. In 1,000 small, helpful steps, each one perfectly sensible on its own. Nobody in this country woke up one day and decided to stop knowing where their food came from. They just took one convenience and then another, and each was a good trade in the moment, and then one day 2 generations had gone by, and there wasn't a single person left in the house who could bake a loaf, or kill a chicken, or put up a jar, and every scrap of what the family ate came from strangers. Nobody chose that outcome. Everybody chose each step. That's how most big losses happen, honestly, and it's why my people are so stubborn about the small steps. They understood that you never get offered the whole trade at once. You get offered it one convenience at a time. And let me be honest about what my people gave up to refuse it, because I'd be painting a lie if I made it sound easy. It's work. Enormous, relentless work. A family that grows and raises and puts up its own food is doing a second full-time job on top of everything else, all year, every year, and the women especially. My great-grandmother's summer was a war, honestly, canning in a hot kitchen for weeks on end while the garden kept coming. There's no romance in it when you're in it. And when the harvest went bad or the hog got sick, there was no shelf to fall back on, and it was a hard, thin winter. So when I tell you they didn't trust the modern food, understand what that cost them. They paid for that independence in labor, every single day of their lives. It was not free and it was not easy, and anybody who tells you otherwise has never done it. And there's a fifth thing they noticed, and I've saved it because it's the one that ties the rest together. They noticed that the food had to tell you it was good. Think about that for a moment. My great-grandmother's eggs never claimed anything. The potatoes in the cellar made no promises. The ham hanging in the smokehouse didn't announce that it was wholesome and natural and part of a balanced life. It just sat there, being a ham. But the new food talked constantly. Every box had a claim on the front of it. Healthy, natural, wholesome, farm fresh, made with real something or other, and a picture of a barn and a field and a smiling family that had nothing whatever to do with where the stuff actually came from. And my people, being plain folk, who are deeply suspicious of anything that oversells itself, looked at all that talking and drew the obvious conclusion. A thing that has to insist on being good is a thing you can't check. Food that you can see doesn't need a label. Food you can't see needs a whole campaign, and the louder the promise on the front of the box, the further away the thing being promised had got from you. And let me tell you the part of this that I think matters most, and it's not about health at all. When you stop knowing where your food comes from, you don't just lose information, you lose the skill. Because if nobody in the house ever bakes, then in one generation, nobody in the house knows how to bake. And in 2 generations, nobody in the house knows that bread is a thing a person can make. It becomes a thing that exists, like weather. And that's a real loss. And it's not sentimental, it's practical. A family that can't make its own food has no floor under it. Whatever happens to the shops, whatever happens to prices, whatever happens to the roads and the trucks and the money, that family is entirely at the mercy of it because they have no other way to eat and no memory of one. My people kept the skill, and the skill is the floor. That's really what they were protecting, not their health, their footing. Now let me be the honest neighbor, because this is exactly the place where I could sell you something frightening, and I won't do it. Modern food has done genuine, enormous good, and it's dishonest to pretend otherwise. Because of it, fewer people starve than at any point in human history. Food is cheaper and more available and more varied than my great-grandparents could have dreamed of. Refrigeration and preservation and safe processing have prevented an enormous amount of the food poisoning and spoilage that used to kill people regularly. Fortified foods wiped out deficiency diseases that used to blind and cripple children. And when the harvest failed in the old days, folks went hungry, genuinely hungry, and children died of it. And that hardly ever happens here now, because of the very system I've been questioning. That is a colossal good, and I'll not wave it away to make a better story. And I'll be honest about the practical side too. Not everyone can grow their own food. Most folks in this world have no land and no time and no money for any of it. And telling them to raise a hog is not advice, it's an insult. Packaged food is what a great many families can actually afford and actually manage, and there is nothing whatever shameful in that. And plenty of what's in a package is perfectly fine. Frozen vegetables are good food. Tinned beans are good food. Plain oats and rice and flour in a bag are good food. It's not the packaging that's the problem, and I'd be a fool to say it was. So what's the honest lesson? It's not don't trust food. It's this: know where your food comes from, as far as you reasonably can, and be honestly suspicious of the distance between you and it. That's the whole principle. It isn't about fear at all. It's about closing the gap. And the beautiful thing is that the gap closes by degrees, and every single degree is worth something. You don't need a farm. You need to move one step closer than you are. Cook from actual ingredients instead of buying the finished thing, and you've closed a big gap in one move, because now you know exactly what's in your supper because you put it there. Buy things with short ingredient lists, because a short list means fewer strangers involved. Buy from a person if you can, a market, a local farm, a butcher, someone whose face you've seen, because that's how trust worked for 10,000 years and it still works. Grow one thing, even a pot of herbs on a sill, just so you remember what it feels like to eat something you know completely. And keep the sugar down, because that's the single biggest thing on the whole list, and it costs nothing to do. And notice, as always, the direction all of that points: toward cheaper. Cooking from ingredients is cheaper than buying the finished thing. Beans and rice and flour and eggs are cheaper than anything with a picture on the box. Growing a tomato is nearly free. The old way was never the expensive way, and anyone who's selling you expensive food on the grounds that it's pure is running the same play from the other side of the shelf. And I'd add one more honest word before I finish. For anyone who's feeling a bit uneasy about their own kitchen right now, don't. That's not what this is for. If you take this and turn it into anxiety, into standing in an aisle reading labels and feeling frightened and guilty about feeding your own family, then I've done you harm rather than good, and you'd have been better off never hearing it. My people are not anxious about food, not in the least. They're the least anxious eaters you'll ever meet, because they simply know what they're eating and then they don't think about it again. That's the goal, and notice it's the opposite of worry. The point of closing the gap isn't to be afraid of what's on the far side of it. It's so you don't have to think about it at all. A person who cooked their own supper from things they recognize doesn't need to read a label, doesn't need to follow the latest scare, doesn't need to know a thing about chemistry, and can just eat their dinner in peace. That peace is the whole prize. Fear isn't a step toward it, it's a step away. And I'll tell you the strangest part of the whole business, which is that the world has quietly started agreeing with them. Look about you now. Folks pay a premium for bread with 4 ingredients in it. There are markets in every city where people queue to buy vegetables from the person who grew them. Butchers are back. Sourdough came back. Folks are keeping hens in suburban gardens and paying handsomely for eggs that my great-grandmother would have thought unremarkable. Nobody frames it as a return to anything. It gets called artisanal and craft and small batch, and it costs 3 times what the box costs. But strip the words off it and look at what's actually being bought, and it's this. It's a shorter chain. It's knowing who made it. It's the exact thing my people never let go of, being sold back to a generation that let it go at a considerable markup. And that's not a criticism of anybody buying it. It's a good instinct, and I'm glad of it. It's just worth noticing that the instinct was always right, and that it used to be free. So here's what I'd leave you with. My people never stopped trusting modern food because they knew something you don't. They stopped because they were never willing to eat anything they couldn't trace back to a person or a piece of ground. That's not knowledge, it's just a rule, and it's a good one, and it's held up remarkably well for 100 years without them ever needing to know a single thing about chemistry. And you can take that rule up in whatever measure your life allows without being frightened of your own kitchen, and without believing anybody's poisoning you. Just move one step closer to your food than you are today. Cook one thing from scratch this week that you'd have bought finished. That's all. That's the whole beginning. Because in the end, the question was never, is this food bad for me? The question my people asked was simpler and better, and it's the one nobody asks anymore. Do I know who made this, and do I know what's in it? And if the answer to both is no, why on earth would I feed it to my children? That's not fear, that's just what we used to call good sense. If this is the kind of honest old wisdom you've been hungry for, the kind that tells you the truth even when the truth is less exciting than the story, and that makes you capable rather than frightened, then stay here with me. There's so much more where this came from, and I aim to bring it back to you, one piece at a time, always honestly. Subscribe, and we'll keep remembering the old ways together, because some of the most valuable things we ever knew are the simple ones we let ourselves forget, and knowing where your own supper came from is surely one of them.